All right, Trouble, say good morning. Let us, what did I just do here? Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, in honor of the birth of their daughter, Oria Tahelen, and the schus, that all of the couples who are davening to be blessed with the bracha of children should Emir Hashem have their tefillos answered bekarov. To thank Stephen Tarizin for dedicating all the Sherman's Roshos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Adin Svi and Naftali Moshe. Shirley Elbaum for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Roshos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Kabel Ben Avram Menachem. And our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Richard and Sharon Buck, in honor of Greg Levitan. Shkoya, thank you to the box, good. And also, Elsa Lustman, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, in honor of Dr. Mark Lustman's birthday. Mazel tov, Dr. Lustman, ad mea ve'esrim shanim tovos. Sammy already sung to you, otherwise I would have done it. But Baruch Hashem, that'll just become redundant. Mazel tov, much bracha and hatzlacha for many years to come. All right, I will say with that, we have an incredible, exceptional, and wonderful daf ahead of us today. So today's daf is Tesvav 15, and we are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem on the bottom of Yud Dalid Amud Beis 14b. We left off 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. Amram Nachman, Hulda. So let's remember again, Hulda was one of the Nevios, was one of the prophetesses that we learned about in yesterday's daf. So now the Gemara says Hulda mibnei banav shel Yoshua haisa. Interesting enough, who was Hulda? She was a descendant of Yehoshua. So the Gemara says, Ksiv hacha ben charsam uksiv hasam betimnas cheres. Okay, so it contrasts Hulda's genealogy with Yehoshua's place of origin. Good. Eisvei Rav Eina Saba, or not his place of origin, but where he lived. Rav Eina Saba, Rav Nachman, but Rav Eina Saba raised the kashta on this. He said, here's the problem. The pasuk says, Shmona Nevi'im, 8 prophets, Vehem Kohanim, who were also Kohanim, Yatsu Meirachav Hazona, were the descendants of Rachav. Ve'eluhein, these were the descendants. Neria, Baruch, Siraya, Mechasya, Yirmiyah, Chilkiah, Chanamel, and Shalom. So these are all the descendants of Rachav. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda Omer, Af Hulda Hanaviyah, Mibnei Baneha Sharachav Hazona Haisa. Hulda was also a descendant of Rachav. So what's going on over here? It's contradiction. You just said before that Hulda is a descendant of Yoshua. Now you're saying that Hulda is a descendant of Rachav. So what's the story? Says the Gemara. After all, because it says the Gemara, Ksiv Hacha ben Tikva, Ksiv Hasan vas Tikvas Chot Hashani. Amarle, he said to him, Eina Saba. So he responded. So remember again, this is Rav Eina Saba is asking the kasha to Rav Nachman. So now Rav Nachman responded. How did he respond? Either he responded by calling him Eina Saba, Eina the older man, or Amarle Pasya Uchma, blackened pot. Now blackened pot is not an insult. Blackened pot is actually a Talmudic compliment, right? Why? What does blackened pot mean? Blackened pot was often the term that was used for someone who lived in dire poverty, yet rose to incredible levels of spiritual accomplishment. So Rav Nachman calls Rav Eina Saba blackened pot as a way of showing you have nothing, yet you have become so great. He calls it Pasya Ochma, Mine uminach testayim shmaita. The truth is, if we combine our two approaches, then Emir Hashem will find the answer to this. How so? Listen to this. So the Gemara says, Di igaire v'nasba Yehoshua. Listen to this. We'll say Rachav. Now remember again, we know Rachav from the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, right? Rachav was the woman who showed the spies how to enter the city of Yericho. So the Gemara says, now in that marriage, she and her family were saved. The Gemara suggests that Rachav converted and she married Yehoshua. Rachav converted, she married Yoshua. So therefore, we both say, therefore it's not a contradiction that Hulda was a descendant of Yoshua, and what? She was also a descendant of Rachav. Both I'll just point out to you, by the way, you see something so incredibly amazing about these shiduchim, right, in biblical times, right? You see yesterday's daf, we saw Bitya, right, and Kalev. Now we see Yehoshua and Rachav, absolutely amazing, which, by the way, is such, I'll just mention it just by Derech Agov. the whole world of shidduchim has become so unnecessarily complicated. And what you see is something absolutely amazing, that it used to be that what made a good shidduch were the midos of the person. Right? Not necessarily the family they came from, and not necessarily, again, all of these secondary circumstances around them, but who the person was, because at the end of the day, isn't that the most important quality to look for in a spouse? The quality of personality, the quality of persona, the nature of one's midos. You can't control who your parents are. You can't control what community you're born into. You can't control what your parents do or don't do for a living, but you can control the kind of person you become. So Kaleb ben Yefuna, great tzaddik, marries the converted daughter of Paro, and ultimately Yoshua ben Nun marries the convert Rachav. And again, you see the offspring that they have are dramatically amazing. A real musar for us to take to heart contemporarily. So the Gemara says as follows: Umi habi le'lazar Yoshua, but did Yoshua have children? V'haksiv nun bino Yoshua bino. The pasuk seems to indicate that Yoshua did not have kids. To which the Gemara says, Bani lo havile, ban san havile. No, he didn't have sons. Yoshua didn't have sons, but he had daughters. So top of Tesvav. So says the Gemara, let's analyze this. Bishlam, so we'll say the Gemara made an interesting statement, right? The Gemara said that Rachav's children, right? What was the lashon here? So the Gemara says that from Rachav 8 Nevi'im came, and they were also Kohanim. So the Gemara says Bishlama in whom Mefarshi. So I understand Chanamel, Baruch, and Siraya. They are all explicitly stated that they were Nevi'im. Ella avasayhu minalan. But how do we know that their fathers, namely Chilkiah, Shalom, Neriah, and Machasya, how do we know that they were Nevi'im? The Amar Ula, both says, is actually very interesting. Ula says, the Amar Ula, Kamakom Sheshmo B'Shem Aviv B'Nevius, B'Makom Sheshmo B'Shem Aviv B'Nevius, Yadua Shehu Navi Ben Navi. Obviously, again, whenever you have a situation of a son and a father's name, both being stated in the context of prophecy, we know that the Navi is the son of a Navi. Shmo v'lo Shem Aviv. What happens if the name of the son is mentioned in the context of the Nevius, but the father is not? B'yadua shehu Navi v'lo ben Navi. Then ultimately, again, you know that he is a Navi and not the son of a Navi. Shmo v'shemiro. So we'll say, therefore, again, the Gemara just answered it, by the way. So the Gemara just explained that halacha l'maisa, even though we have no explicit statement of prophecy by Chilkiah, Shalom, Neriah, Machasya, but because ultimately their sons are known by their names, right? Their sons, it's Chanamel, Baruch, and Srai, known by the names of their fathers. That indicates to us that their fathers were Nevi'im as well. So the Gemara goes on. The Gemara says, Shmo v'shemiro. Whenever the Navi highlights the name of the prophet and the name of his city, so the Gemara says, Biadua Shuhume Osaha'ir. The Navi will tell me the name of that city to tell me that that is the place of origin for this Navi. Listen to this. Shmo v'lo shemiro. What happens if the Navi gives me the name of the Navi but doesn't give me the name of the place where he came from? So Biadua Shuhume Yerushalayim. Isn't that incredible? Right? If the Navi doesn't tell me where a Jew is from, there's only one place for a Jew to be from, which is from Yerushalayim, right? If you don't tell me where you're from, I have to assume that you're from Yerushalayim. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Masnisa Tana. Both say first wide line. Masnisa Tana. Kol shema'asav u'ma'aseh avosav stumin. Both is actually very interesting. Anytime you find the following situation, let's say the Navi introduces us to someone, and the truth is we know nothing about this person in general, or about his father. And then the Navi tells us a story. Uparat lecha kasav be'echad mehen l'shvach. And then the Navi goes ahead and tells me an episode, a positive episode about an individual. Kigon, Devar Hashem asher haya el Tzefanya ben Kushi ben Gedalia. So for example, right, the Navi says the word of God came to Tzefanya, the son of Kushi, the son of Gedalia. So Biadua, Shu Tzadik ben Tzadik. This is actually very interesting. Let's say, so the Gemara teaching is like this. Whenever the Navi introduces us to someone, and we don't know this person, but the Navi tells me something positive about this person and his father, right? Trace back the genealogy. That tells us that it was a family of righteous people. In other words, which is interesting. In other words, if the Navi is only going to tell me one thing about a person, and that thing is positive, that tells me that the identity of this mishpacha is righteous. So on the flip side, on the flip side, if halacha l'maisa, the Navi introduces me to someone and just tells me something, the one thing the Navi tells me is what? Is negative. So kigon, Vayi b'chodesh hashvi ba Yishmael ben Nisanya ben Elishama biyadua shu Rasha ben Rasha. By the way, just to understand the context that's being quoted over here, this is Gedalia ben Achikam, who was assassinated by Yishmael ben Nisanya. Right, Som Gedalia. So here the Navi is telling me something amazing, that here I'm introduced to Sefania ben Kushi ben Gedalia. One positive thing tells me the entire family was righteous. And then it also introduces me to Yishmael ben Nesanya ben Elishama. The only thing I know about this family is that what? Is that Yishmael assassinated Gedalia. So again, when the Navi tells me one thing that's positive about a mishpacha and multiple generations, tells me the family was righteous. Tells me one thing about a multi-generational family and it's negative, tells me the family was wicked. Incredible. Rav Nachman. So we'll say Malachi, Zem Mordechai. This is very interesting. The Navi Malachi was really Mordechai. Valama nikra Shema Malachi. So why was he called Malachi? His name was Mordechai. Shahaya Mishnah Lamelech. Because remember again, by the end of the Megillah, Mordechai is elevated to the position of Mishnah Lamelech, the second in command to the king. So Malachi is like a play on Melech, right? He's like the Melechol. He's the second in command to the king. So Meisvei, is that really true? But I may say, Baruch ben Neriah, V'Saraya, V'Sarai Masya, V'Daniel, U'Mordechai Bilshon, V'Chagai Zechariah U'Malachi, Kulon Nisnavu Bishnas Shtei Meshre Esrei Dayavesh. So Rabbi say the Gemara lists a list of prophets over here who all prophesied during the second year of King Dariavesh. And how does it list them? It lists Mordechai and Malachi as separate people. To which the Gemara says, Tiyufta, you're right. This is a refutation. So I'll say, wrong, scratch that. Mordechai is not Malachi. Tanya Amr Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Malachi ze Ezra. Who's Malachi? Malachi is Ezra. The Chachamim Amr Malachi Shmo. Others say no, Malachi is not. You know who Malachi is? Malachi is Malachi. Malachi is Malachi. Rabbi say, Amr Nachem Mistaber Kiman Amr Malachi ze Ezra. Dichsiv b'nevius Malachi, Bagda Yehuda v'to'eva nesta b'Yisrael b'Yushalayim, ki chila Yehuda kodesh Hashem, asher ahav u'Baal bas el nechar. Shabbos said, listen to this. The pasuk seems to indicate when talking about Malachi, talking about the fact that the men from Yehuda had married non-Jewish women, and is rebuking them for intermarrying and marrying non-Jewish women. So the Gemara says, Uman naf afrish nashim nachrios, and who was the one who took it upon himself to command the Jewish men to divorce their non-Jewish wives? Ezra. Now we'll say, by the way, this was a big thing. This is tied into the story as to why only a fraction of Jews came up with Ezra from Babel to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. Some of it was just that we got comfortable in Babel, we got comfortable in diaspora. But a big part of it was also the fact that there was rampant intermarriage. And Ezra rebuked them. Ezra gave them musar, and many of them listened to Ezra. Many of them, as a result of that, divorced their Gentile wives and came back with Ezra to Eretz Yisrael to once again begin a Jewish life. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says, Ezra. Vayan Shechina ben Yechiel ben Eilam Vayomer laEzra Anachnu ma'alnu be'Elokeinu v'noshav noshim nachrios. Okay, so we'll say, so this seems to be a proof that ultimately, again, Malachi is really Ezra. Good. So I'll just point out to her something very interesting. It is very, very amazing to see. You see this opinion that says over here, we're trying to figure out who Malachi is. Is it Mordechai? Is it Ezra? And then in the middle of this, you have this idea that says, who's Malachi? It's Malachi. So often when looking at our own personalities, we try to figure out who we should model ourselves after, right? Which is normal. In life, you're supposed to have role models. And having role models is a very positive thing. But at the end of the day, a role model is there for me to take example. I'd like to have that midah. I'd like to have this midah. I'd like to have this character trait. But at the end of the day, the goal is never to become like someone else. The goal is to always be yourself. and to be the best version of yourself. Same thing with raising children. Too often parents fall into the trap of trying to model one child after another. And the truth is, it can have catastrophic consequences for children. Each child is a world unto himself, and each child has to be not Malachi, that's Mordechai, not Malachi, that's Ezra. Malachi, that's Malachi. Right? I have to be me. I have to become the best version of me. And often the way I do that is by modeling myself after other people. But at the end of the day, says the Gemara, Malachi is Malachi. I have to be me, you have to be you. We draw on role models to try to inspire us to become better, but we have to be true to HaKadosh Baruch who created us as. Incredible Gemara. So Tana Abanan, Arba Nashim Yififiyos Ha'iba'olam. Both said there were 4 beautiful women in the world. So it's actually interesting. This is kind of picking up on the Shiva Nevios, where we spoke about 7 prophetesses. Now the Gemara speaks about the 4 most beautiful women in the world. Who were we just spoke about before. She converted and married Yoshua. She was, I will say it's a machlokis in the Gemara about all Mefarshim in the Nevi'im. He calls her Rachav Hazona, right? So the shaila is being machlokis and Mefarshim. Does Zona mean that literally again she was a harlot? Like that she and which is an incredible thing that she became a balas tshuva and that she converted and that Yoshua married her. The other possibility of that Zona was also the term used for an innkeeper, not from lashon of znus, but from lashon of mazon. The Malbim says that sometimes it was sometimes again the inns also became a place, of inappropriate or what's the right word? Immoral behavior. Okay. In any event, the point over here, she's included in this list, and Esther. So the Gemara says, Laman Damer Esther Yirok Rakas Haisa. And we saw this in the Gemara, that one of the reasons we called Esther Hadassah is because she had a greenish complexion. Now it's a machlokes, is the greenish complexion a compliment? Right, the compliment or actually a detraction. So according to the opinion that says that she was greenish and therefore not as beautiful, Mapik Esther Umayel Vashti. Esther out of the 4. And instead they put in Vashti, we'll say, which is pretty incredible. Tan Rabbanan, Rachav, we actually saw Bishma Zinsa. Rachav, ultimately, again, even with her name. Rashi says over here, Bishma Zinsa, Maskir Eshma, the name Rachav. Just saying the name Rachav could arouse a person. So the Gemara says, Yael. So Yael, remember again, this is Yael Hakim. Devorah and Barak, right? Yael is the one who killed Sisera. So Yael Bekola. So Yael, her voice, right? Just hearing her voice ultimately could bring one to arousal. Avigail Bischirasa. Avigail, just mentioning her name. Thinking about her. Thinking about Avigail could create arousal. Michal Bas Shaul. So I'll say it's interesting now. Now what we're talking about is whereas there might be 4 of the most beautiful women, there are many other beautiful women as well. And these women had an impact. So Michal Bas Shaul, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, who was the wife of David HaMelech as well. Biri Asa. By seeing her, one would come to arousal. Rabbi Yitzchak. Kala Omer Rachav, Rachav Miyad Nikri. We saw this Gemara. Rabbi Yitzchak says, whoever says the name Rachav twice, immediately experiences a seminal emission. Armely of Nachman, I don't know. Ana Amina Rachav Velo Ichpasli. I say it. Rachav, right? Nothing, right? Nothing happens. So says the Gemara. Amrle Kika Amina Biyodo Makir. No. What it means is if you know her, right? If you know her, right? In other words, right? Just saying the name Rachav twice doesn't do anything. But if a person were to know Rachav, ultimately just saying her name could bring one to that level of arousal. Good, weiter. Says the Gemara, Mordechai Yodes Kal Asher Nasa. Both say, now we're going to go back to the Megillah. Mordechai knew everything that had occurred. Now both say, now what does this mean? Just the context. Remember, this is after Haman had elevated, Achashverosh had elevated Haman. And now again, remember, Haman had sent out the letters, pretty much what he felt was sealing the fate of the Jewish people. Mordechai heard everything that had occurred. He tore his clothing, right? And he went out into the street and he cried out, so the Gemara says, my Amar. So we'll say, the Pasuk says, Mordechai Yodes Kal Asher Nasa, Vayikra Mordechai Yisbekada, Vayilbash Sak Ve'efer, Vayetzi B'Sochayer, Vayizak Za'aka Gidola. He cried out. So the Gemara assumes, it's interesting, when you read the pasuk, you assume, we'll say, that what's a cry? What's a cry? A cry, all right, a cry. The Gemara assumes he said something. So what did he say? My Amar, Amar Rav, my Amar, Rav Amar, Gava Haman me Achashverosh. What he cried out was, Haman has been elevated over Achashverosh. So what Mordechai saw in this was, again, like we saw before, Achashverosh was no lover of the Jews, but it's not like Achashverosh ever took such dramatic action against the Jewish people. So in this decree, he saw that essentially Haman had usurped the power of Achashverosh. Shmuel said, Gavar Malki Ilah mi Malka Tasa. But said it's actually very dramatic. Shmuel said what Mordechai said was, the upper king has taken control over the lower king. Now Rashi points out this was a euphemism. And what Mordechai was really saying was, it appears that the earthly king has taken control over the upper king. What Mordechai was saying is, Ribono Shel Olam, where are you? Where are you? Because it appears that the lower king Achashverosh has just usurped your authority by decreeing this horrific decree upon the Jewish people. Profound. Vatischalchal hamalka. So the pasuk says, when Esther heard what happened about the decree, vatischalchal. Now vatischalchal literally means like a shaking. She began to shake. My vatischalchal amarav shepir sanida. Ultimately, again, she became a nida, right? She began to menstruate. I will say what that means is there's a concept in Hilchos Nida also that a woman could begin to see dam nida as a result of pachad, as a result of fear. So Esther was so shaken that ultimately, again, she begins to bleed. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar shehutzru chalin kaveh. Literally, again, her bowels became weak. She was sick. She literally became sick to her stomach. Vatikra Esther lahasach. So Esther called for hasach. So both says, remember again, the pasuk over here is she called Esther, right? Esther called out to hasach. Here the pasuk about Tikra Esther lahasach misar say melach sharmi la'afanav. So she called hasach and she says to hasach, go to Mordechai and find out what is going on. Amarav hasach zed Daniel. Hasach is actually Daniel. Hasach. Why was he called Hasach? Shechatchu migdulaso. Interestingly enough, because whereas Hasach was a very powerful man in previous kingdoms, when Achashverosh came to power, and probably under the influence of Haman as well, his portfolio was diminished. Shmuel says, Shekol divrei malchus nechtachin al piv. Others say, Shmuel says, no. He had the same level of prominence, right? What it means is, Hasach means all of the words of the kingdom were decided through his mouth. Literally, nechtachin al piv, were cut through. In other words, that he had incredible influence. So in any event, Esther sends him to Mordechai, la da'as mazeh v'al mazeh, to find out what exactly is going on. Amr Yitzchak, sholchalo. So this is both. So here's what's interesting. What the Gemara is bothered by is, why does Esther need to send Hasach to Mordechai, who's outside of the palace, to find out what's going on? Esther's in the palace. She knows what's going on. So what is she trying to find out? So this is incredible. Esther is trying to find out from Mordechai, why is this happening to the Jewish people? Shalchalo, Shema Avri Yisrael Chamishechum Sheitorah. So she asked Mordechai, I'll say, here's question number one. Has Klal Yisrael stopped observing the Torah? Right? Esther is away from her people. So Esther might know what's happening in the palace, but she does not know what's happening within Klal Yisrael. So at the end of the day, she asks Mordechai, right? So Al Mazeh is a play on words. She asks him, Al Mazeh v'Al Mazeh. Have they become lax in their observance of Torah? Because again, when the Hasaras Hadibros are written on the Luchos, it says Mizeh u'Mizeh. So we saw this back in Tainus, that you could read the Luchos from what? From both sides. So have they become lax in their observance of Torah? Vayagidu leMordechai as divrei Esther. So I'll say, so remember again, we're fast forwarding a little bit in the Megillah. Mordechai says to Esther, you have to go to the king. And remember again, what does Esther say initially? Initially, she says, essentially, no. It's a nice no, but it's a no. I can't go to the king, because you can't go to the king without being summoned. If you go to the king without being summoned, you run the risk of death. So v'ilu ihu lo azal agabe. So interestingly enough, so here's what's interesting. This whole time, Hasach is the go-between. Yet this last time, V'agidu Mordechai's divrei Esther, says they told Mordechai the words of Esther. Where did Hasach go? Where did Hasach go? V'ilu ihu lo azal agabe. Hasach didn't come back to Mordechai. From here, what do we see? You don't deliver bad news. This is so interesting. For some reason, I don't know why this is. There must be a psychological reason for this. That sometimes, people really get very excited to deliver bad news, right? So the Gemara says, don't be the bearer of bad news, right? So how do you know this? Because this is amazing. Hasach apparently didn't deliver the message back from Esther to Mordechai, right? The message back from Esther to Mordechai was, can't go. And Hasach will not deliver it. He sends it with someone else. From here you see, don't be the bearer of bad news. So remember again, now, finally Mordechai prevails upon Esther. You have to go. So what does Esther say? Lech kinos eskala Yehudim. Now, both I think that this is probably one of the most dramatic parts in the entire Megillah. Now, it's interesting. The pasuk that the Gemara is talking about is as follows. Esther says to Mordechai, Lech kinos eskala Yehudim asher hanutzam b'shushan abira. Go ahead. Right. Go and gather all of the Jews. Go and gather all of the Jews in Shushan. I'm just quoting the pasuk. Fast for me. Don't eat, don't drink for 3 days, 3 nights. I'm also going to fast, and I'm going to go to the king asher lo kidas in an unnatural way. The kasher avadati. And as I am lost, I will be lost. So both say, listen to this. So what does it mean? Ada shelo kidas. Rabbi Abba shelo kidas haya. So ultimately, again, Esther says this is now an unnatural way of going to Achashverosh. How so? Shebechol yom bayom ad akshav ba'ones va'achshav beratzon. See, Rabbi say, listen to this. Remember we saw in yesterday's Gemara, a very moving Gemara, that Esther would go to the mikvah and go back to Mordechai, her husband. That was only permitted because her relationship with Achashverosh was a non-consensual relationship. What she says, I'll go to Achashverosh, but just understand, when I go to him and I initiate with him, that's the end of our marriage. Because now I can no longer say that my relations with Achashverosh are non-consensual, because I am the one who is initiating this contact with him. And when that happens, then amazingly enough, that becomes deemed as an act of adultery. Once it becomes deemed as an act of adultery, then ultimately what? Then ultimately halacha l'maisa, she becomes prohibited to Mordechai forever. And that's why I will say, some have the minhag to also read that phrase, kasher avaditi, as eicha. Why is that? So we often think it's because Esther's risking her life, which is true, right? So there's two avaditis. Right, there's two avaditis, as we're going to see here. It's such a tragic piece of the Megillah. She says, I've already been lost from my people. Right? I've already been lost from my father's family. I'm already lost. Right? I was lost to the Jewish people the day that I was taken into the palace. But now, Mordechai, I'm going to be lost to you as well. I'll be lost to you as well, because from this point on, I will be forever prohibited to you, which means effectively, by doing this, our marriage is over. Our marriage is over. Which I will say, I'll just point out, by the way, Esther HaMalka, we'll get into this, is the fascinating discussion of what we call an Avera Lishma. There is a concept like this of now don't try this at home, an Avera Lishma, right? But there is a concept like this of an Avera Lishma, of doing an Avera L'Shem Shamayim. And it is permitted under extreme circumstances, usually Hatzalas Yisrael. Usually when it comes to an existential danger. And that's what Esther HaMalka is doing. It's an Avera L'Shma. And I will say, you see over here, by the way, I just want to point out the ridiculous Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice of Esther HaMalka. She gave up everything. I've already lost my people. I somehow was able to hold on to my marriage. And now, I will lose that as well. Esther says, I'll do this. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do for Klal Yisrael. But at the end of the day, the sacrifice is everything. And it's interesting, in the Gemara, she doesn't even bring up her own life, right? My own life is my own life. That I'm willing to sacrifice. But I've lost everything else. Such an incredible Gemara. Vayavra Mordechai. So Mordechai ultimately goes ahead. Vayavra Mordechai. So what does it mean? Amarav shehever yom rishon shal Pesach b'tainis. So both say he caused, literally again, the first day of Pesach to be passed over. Mordechai converted the first day of Pesach into a tainus, into a fast day. We're going to get into this in Meretz Hashem. Look at Rashi for just a moment. We're going to get into the timeline a little bit more in tomorrow's daf, but what we're going to see is, in fact, they fasted on the first day of Pesach because this is when we're going to see the letters were sent out. Yud Gimel Benisa Nichtivu Haigaros. So we're going to see they fasted the 14th, 15th, and 16th of Nisan, in Nisan, by Pesach time. So Vayavra Mordechai did something amazing. You're not allowed to fast on Yom Tiv. He made the first day of Pesach into a fast. Shmuel says, no, what he did is he went to the other side of the river in order to gather the rest of the Jewish people, because again, this was going to be a public tainus. It was on the third day. Esther put on Malchus. We saw this in yesterday's daf. Big day Malchus, me boy. What do you mean she put on Malchus? It should say clothing of Malchus. So Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Chanina, Malamed Shalav Shisa Ruach HaKodesh. She donned Ruach HaKodesh. Also remember again, this was the raya that Esther was in Neviah. She put on Ruach HaKodesh. She put on prophecy. Ksiv HaChavatilash, Ksiv Hasam, V'ruach Lavshes Amasai. Amr Rabbi Lazar, Amr Rabbi Chanina, Li'olam Alti Birchas Hedyot Kala Beinech. This is very beautiful. A blessing of a simple person should never be simple in your eyes, right? The bracha, Hedyot, means a simple person. Never take the blessing of a simple person lightly. Why? Shari Shnei Gidolei Adar, Baruchum Shnei Hedyotos, Biniskaimu Bahen, Ve'elohein, David Vidaniel, David Debarche Aravna, Tichsiv Ayom Aravna Alamelech, Daniel Debarche Daryavesh, Tichsiv Elakach di Antplach Le Betadiro Hu Yishaz Zinech. So let's listen to this. David HaMelech was blessed by Aravna, right? Aravna Hayevusi. Aravna was a guy, right? He was actually the owner of the Haravayas, which was a threshing floor. David HaMelech bought the threshing floor from Aravna Hayevusi, the future side of the Beis HaMikdash, and Aravna gave David a bracha. Similarly, again, Daniel was blessed by Daryavesh. And when was he blessed by Daryavesh? Right before he was thrown into the den of lions. And it was the bracha of Daryavesh, the Gemara says, in addition to the schos of Daniel, that ultimately went ahead and led to his salvation. So you see from here, I will say, an incredible yisod. You see from here, don't let the bracha, right, the bracha of a simple Jew. I have such a good story to share with you about that. Mamish don't have time for it, but you'll remind me, it's a Rabbi Yitzchak Abraditchev story. Mamish, incredible maisa. The power of a bracha of a simple Jew has such incredible import. So you want to say, Rabbi Chanina, Alti killas hadyot kala beinecha. The converse is also true. The curse of a simple person also carries weight. Shari Avimelech kilal es Sarah. Avimelech cursed Sarah. Now it was a little bit of a nuanced curse. He says to her, Hine hu lacha or hine lach ksusei naim. Now remember again, Sarah, this was one of the episodes where Avram told everyone that Sarah was his sister. Avimelech took her, and the whole household was like smitten with some plague. So Avimelech is like a shtickle resentful. Like, well, why did you tell me she was your sister? So he gives Sarah a veil. Ksusei naim. Now the veil was a shtach. What was the shtach? The shtach was, you pulled the wool over my eyes, right? You pulled the veil over my eyes. So again, ostensibly he gave it to her because she was such a tzanua, she was so modest, right? Here is your ksusei naim. But it was a little bit of a shtach because you pulled the wool over my eyes. And why? So the Gemara says, v'niskai bizara, and that curse came true in her descendants. Vahi kizakin Yitzchak v'atechahana einav. Wow. So the Gemara attributes Yitzchak's blindness to the curse of Avimelech. So I will say how careful you have to be with the bracha of a simple person and with the curse of a simple person. I will say, listen to this beautiful Gemara from Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says, Rabbi Chanina, Bo urei shelo kimidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu midas basar v'adam. See how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so different than a mortal. How so? Midas basar v'adam adam shofes kider v'achar kach nosein l'socha mayim. The way it works is, man, we'll say if a person wants to boil water, what does he have to do? First, you have to put the pot on the stove, and then you put the water in the pot. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu nosein mayim v'achar kach shofes hasagidir. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, first he puts the water, then he creates the pot. L'kaim mashenemar, l'kol sito hamon mayim bashamayim. So we'll say, what does this mean? So perhaps the pshat in the Gemara is like this. We'll say if you have a pot and you have a water, you have two different things. The water is the goal, right? What's the goal? The goal is to boil water. So the way it works with man is that often, remember again, we have to create all of the circumstances first to allow for the actualization of the goal. So first I have to put the pot, then I have to put the water, and then I can boil the water. The way that and again, that is a linear progression. You can't start with the water without the pot. With HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. See, Rabbi say, here's what's interesting, is in life, right, I know what the goal is, but I have to kind of create the circumstances to allow for the actualization of the goal. What's the great challenge of life, right? We'll say, let's be honest, this is a good time, it's too tired to not be honest, right? So if we're honest, what often happens in life, you a lot of times get caught up with the steps to allow for the actualization of the goal, and what ends up happening? I don't end up actualizing the goal, right? We'll say so many times in life, we get caught up in the process, and so we never really get to the finish line. I spend all of my time creating and making and putting the pot on the flame, and often I forget to go ahead and boil up the water. But yet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never loses sight of the goal, and the goal is always the first thing. First, he creates the water. The goal has already actualized. This goes back to yesterday's daf and Shabbos' daf, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the refuah before the makkah. By the Ribono Shel Olam, the result already exists. It already exists. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the result, he has the water, and then afterwards he creates the pot around the water. That's what it means. The goal is here. The refuah is here. The finish line has already been crossed. Now it's just a shayla how to create the circumstances around the goal. Man can't operate that way. Man first has to create the pot, and then after I put the pot, I have to put the water in it, then I have to wait for it to boil. But I will say, but such an incredible yisud, because what happens to us so often in life is I have a moment of clarity. I know what I want to accomplish. I know what I want to do. I need to put the pot, I need to put the water in the pot, I need to turn on the fire, I need to boil the water. I know exactly what I need to accomplish. But then what ends up happening is, I put the pot, the pot's not in the right place, I have to put the fire is not so hot, and I end up getting caught up in all of the details of the process, and I never end up boiling the water. I never end up accomplishing the things I want to accomplish in life, right? We'll say, doesn't this happen to us all of the time? That's the reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu in man. Whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to accomplish, he accomplishes, right? Because why? Because he's able to create the accomplishment first. The water comes in first. Man doesn't work that way. I will say that's why our nisayon in life is don't get caught up in the pot. Well, it doesn't sound right, but you understand, right? In other words, don't go ahead and lose yourself in the process and lose sight of the goal. Make sure you end up boiling up your water. Be divine in that sense. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is driven by the goal. We have to be driven by the goal as well. Such an incredible. I always say, I just want to point out, this is why, please, like, if you're taking your notebook or you're not taking the notebook, you have your own notebook, you have to keep track of these things. You have to. It is a chiyuv mid'oraisa. Yeah, and I was just over on Baltosif, but it's a chiyuv d'oraisa. Like, how can you not? These are the guide marks for proper living. How do you live a life without Megillah Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph? Because Rabbi say again, if you don't have this, you get caught up in the processes. Rabbi say life is so short, isn't it incredible? The year is over, right? Because you have to. It's not just even though we measure our lives by the Jewish calendar. We live in this world. So another year is coming to a close. Another year is coming to a close. And what have we done? Have we accomplished the things we want to accomplish? If I don't keep track of these soldos like this, the end of next year is going to be the same thing. Nice. Oh, it's very nice, very beautiful. It's not nice. It's not nice. It's a necessity for proper living. We have to keep track of these. These are the pearls of Chazal. Okay, let's go on. Anyway, you got the point. So the Gemara says as follows. If a person goes ahead, and there are still notebooks here if anyone needs, whoever goes ahead and says something in the name of the person who said it brings geula to the world. Beautiful. Esther told over right in the name of Mordechai about the assassination plot. And ultimately, that sowed the seeds of geula. Tzaddik avad l'doro avad. Both say this is so beautiful. When a tzaddik dies, he's only lost to his generation. Mashallah Adam Sha'avdallah Margalis, right? This can be compared to a person who loses a jewel. Komakom Shehi Margalit Shma. Lo avda ela lebayla. Boss, listen to how beautiful this is. If a person loses a precious stone, right? So I will say, wherever the precious stone is, it's what? It's still a precious stone. It's just that it's lost to me. It's just that it's lost to me. I will say, what a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. So in other words, the stone never loses its identity. I just don't have it. When a person passes away, when a tzaddik leaves this world, the tzaddik is lost to me. Right? I will say, you can apply this to your loved ones as well. My loved one is lost to me, but my loved one is still my loved one. The neshama is still the neshama, which I will say is also an incredible metaphor for tshuva. That a lot of times in life, the jewel, me, I get lost. Each of us is a jewel. Each of us is a precious stone. Each of us is a precious neshama. And the neshama gets lost. The beautiful thing is wherever I'm lost, I'm still a beautiful neshama. I might be lost to myself. I might not know where I am. I might not know where I'm going. I might not know what I'm doing. But the good news is wherever I am lost, I am still a precious neshama. So the Gemara goes weiter. V'chol ze einenu shoveli. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. B'shah shiras Haman es Mordechai Yosef b'shar melech. Amar kol ze einu shoveli. Remember again when Haman sees Mordechai sitting by the gates of the palace, he says, all of this is worth nothing to me. Kedrav Chista, Rav Chista, Zeba bepruz buli, v'zeba bepruz buti. Rabbi said this is a wild Gemara. Look at Rashi, last Rashi before you turn the daf. Zeba bepruz buli. Rashi says, Mordechai ba'ila b'tanis osher, Haman ba'b'tanis oni, shemachar Haman esatzal Mordechai kol dim lachin yamim rabim, b'kikare lechem. Says Rashi, there is a story that precedes the Megillah, and the story is one of Haman being a destitute man, Mordechai being a very wealthy individual, and Haman becoming the indentured servant of Mordechai for 10 loaves of bread. Haman worked his way out of the servitude, but whenever Haman saw Mordechai, who did he see? He saw his master. He saw his master, which Rabbi say helps us to understand the profound hatred and animosity that Haman felt for Mordechai. Because whenever Haman saw Mordechai, he felt inadequate. He felt that he did not measure up. He saw glimpses of his former destitutekeit, right, of his former poverty, and it brought him back to those days that he did not wish to remember. Amud Beis says the Gemara, Amra Papa, the Karele Avda. They used to call Haman the servant who was bought for loaves of bread. In other words, say that's how he was known. This was a high-profile relationship, that Haman was the indentured servant of Mordechai. Obviously, somehow he worked himself out of that debt, right? He worked himself out of that servitude. But isn't it absolutely incredible that every single time Haman saw Mordechai, he said, none of this is worth anything to me because I remember the fact that I was his servant. It's incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Haman used to keep a tally and accounting of all of his wealth. It was engraved on his heart. And I will say, people have different things engraved on their heart. Some people have a love of the Ribbon Shalom engraved on their heart. Some people have their money engraved on their heart. Everybody has something different engraved on their heart. So Haman had his money, and he said, Amar kol ze einenu shaveli. He said again, none of this is worth anything to me. When I go ahead and I see Mordechai, I see Mordechai sitting by the gate of the king. Which tells you something amazing. If you are not happy with who you are, you can have everything and anything in this world, and it means absolutely nothing. Haman has everything. He has wealth, he has power, he has prominence, but yet there's a feeling of inadequacy that he possesses within, and that inadequacy is triggered every single time he sees Mordechai, and as a result of a feeling of inadequacy, he cannot be happy. If you can't find happiness with yourself, you will not find happiness in life. So the Gemara says, ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to become a crown on the head of every tzaddik, both reminiscent of the end of Maseches Taanis. Shenemar, Bayomahu Yashem Tzvakos Lateres Tzvi. My Lateres Tzvi Uletzviras Tifara. Laosin Sivyonon Ulemitzapin Tifarto. Who does HaKadosh Baruch Hu become? An Lateres Tzvi, a crown, right? A tiara of splendor to those ultimately, again, who go ahead and carry out His will, Ulemitzapin Tifarto, and who yearn and to experience the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yochol Lakol, you might have thought for everyone. Tamalomar L'Sheramo, L'Misha Mesim Asmo Kishir. I will say, who gets, I just want to point out over here, the Navi is experiencing, by this Bayomahu is the Navi in Yeshaya. So the Navi, the Gemara's understanding is is foreshadowing the beauty of Olam Haba, what happens in Olam Haba. So in Olam Haba, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is this crown for the righteous, but not for everyone. Not everybody gets to experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who gets to experience the tzaddikim? And what's the definition of a tzaddik? Lemishemesim atzmo kishirayim. Someone who makes himself like leftovers. Which means what? In other words, someone who's humble. Someone who is humble in this world gets to experience the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world to come. We'll say, listen to this. Uluruach mishpat. And again, furthermore, the Navi says, the Navi is going through all of the people who will get to experience the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Olam Haba. What does it mean? The Uluruach mishpat. Rabbi says, listen to this. Zeh hadon es yitzro. This is someone who judges his yetzer. Now, we'll say, what does it mean to judge your yetzer? To judge your yetzer hara, what does that mean? So Rashi says, kofeu lashuv b'tshuva. It means that you force yourself to do tshuva when you do wrong. Perhaps lodun as yitzra also means something else. See, Rabbi say, you know what life is all about? The secret to success? I don't know what the secret to success is, but I think that a step to success is at every step of the way to always conduct a cost-benefit analysis. See, Rabbi say, everything in life comes with a cost and comes with a benefit. The difference is that a lot of times when I sin, I don't do the cost-benefit analysis. All I see is like, okay, this is nice, this is pleasurable, this is enjoyable. But the truth is, dan as yitzro means I do it in Torah. Okay, I want to sin. Let me think about this. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to sin? That's what it means to be done. What's a din? What's a din Torah? A din Torah is the judge sits down, the dayan sits down, and Reuven says this, and Shimon says this, and the dayan says, okay, Reuven, I hear that point, Shimon, I hear that point, and the dayan has to go and listen to both sides. Also, there might be legitimate reasons to sin. There might be compelling reasons to sin, but I have to hear the other side also. There has to be a din Torah to be done as yitzro, to do the cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth it? If it's worth it, go for it. But very often, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I have to be done my yetzer. I have to do the din Torah on the aver. I have to do the cost-benefit analysis. If I do that, that's the kind of person who gets to rejoice with the Shechina in the Olam HaEmes. U'liyoshev al HaMishpat, ze'adan din emes la'amito. L'yoshev al HaMishpat refers to a judge who adjudicates a case correctly. Those people also have a portion of the world to come. U'legvura ze'amiskaber al yitzro. Someone who finds, Rabbi say, the strength. I say it takes so much strength to overcome the Yetzer Hara. We know so many of us struggle with this each and every day. But if we're able to find the strength and able to overcome the Yetzer Hara, what's waiting for us in this world and in the next world is so overwhelmingly amazing. Meshivim Mechama, Shenosim V'Nostim Mechamta Shel Torah. What does it mean, Meshivim Mechama? Those who engage in the battle of Torah each and every day. Sha'ara Elo Talmidei Chachamim Shemashkiminu Ma'arivim B'Batei Knesses B'Batei Midrashos. Rabbi say again, what is Sha'ara? Those are Talmidei Chachamim who get up early to come to shul, stay late in the Beis Medrash. Ultimately, all of these individuals have a special portion in the Olam HaEmes, get to wear the crown, experience the crown of the Shechina. Amra Midas Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ribon Shalom Man Nishtanu Elu Me'elu. So listen to this. So the Midas Hadin says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Ultimately, again, what's the difference between Elu and Elu? In other words, why do you always show favoritism to the Jews? Right? At the end of the day, they sin just like everyone else. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yisrael asku b'Torah, umos ha'olam lo asku b'Torah. Wow. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Torah. Klal Yisrael learns Torah. Both say the power of learning Torah, even if I'm a sinner, right? Even if I'm an avari, I'm doing so many terrible things. At the end of the day, if I'm learning Torah, that has the ability to elevate me. Amar le gam ela b'yayin shago u'b'sheichar ta'u pako palila. Ein pako el gehenim shneimar v'lo siezos lepuka. Vein palila el dayana shneimar v'nasa miflilin. That's good. So both say, so the idea over here is, even though we make mistakes, the Gemara says, it is the Torah that we have that ultimately provides us salvation. Absolutely incredible. We'll say one more line. So Vatamod b'chatzer beis hamelech hapanimis. Esther gets to the inner courtyard of the king. Amar Ablevi kevan shegila beis hatzlam nistanklem and a Shechina. As soon as she got to the courtyard, the Shechina left her. Right, so Esther is ready to go in. Right, Esther is ready to go into the palace of the king, and she stops. She stops because she feels that the Shechina has left her in the inner chamber. So Amra Keli Lama Azaftani. She said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why have you left me? Shema Ata Dan Al Shogei Kamezid va'al onis keratzon. Maybe you're treating a shogig like a mazid, or a or an extenuating circumstance like a willful commission. So we'll say what Esther's saying to Achashverosh, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, maybe you're upset with me because you think I've committed an avera. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you've seen everything that I've done. Everything that I've done has been against my will, and everything that I've done has been an only. Why? Maybe Oshema Ashim Shekarasiv Kelev. Maybe you're upset at me that I called Achashverosh a kelev, a dog. Shenemar hatzila mecherev nashimiyat kelev yichidasi chaza vikar aso aryeh. Shenemar hushiini pi aryeh. She changed her tune and then she said, "Go ahead," and she said, hey, "Save me from the mouth of the lion." So we'll say we'll stop over here for today. But again, I just want to point out something amazing. Which is that Esther says maybe my mistake was that I called Achashverosh a dog, and so we'll say So I don't know, that seems kind of fitting for Achashverosh. So I will say the amazing part is any person who is given power and authority comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a concept of not speaking disparagingly about that person. We see this, by the way, by Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately, again, wouldn't dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu in front of Paro. See, Rashi says it's because of the Avodah Zarah. The other Mefarshim bring down because of the sign of respect to Paro as well. So amazingly enough, Esther said, maybe my mistake was disrespect. And therefore she changes her tune. We'll stop over here for today. We'll Amir Tashem pick up with the tefillah of Esther Malka and her encounter with Achashverosh tomorrow. Shkayach. Amen.